My name is Josh, and welcome to Hide and Seek Archives, a podcast where we talk about things supernatural, cryptid, or unexplained. And we are live. Welcome, everyone. Today we have Jen with the She-Squatchers. Hi, Jen. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself and the She-Squatchers.
All right. Well, I'm Jen Cruz. I'm team leader of the She-Squatchers. I know Jenna couldn't join us tonight. She wasn't feeling too well. And Tammy's in the Florida Keys having way too much fun without us.
Oh,
Um, she's on vacation. So it's just me tonight, but there's actually three of us. And I started the team in 2015 after doing an interview with Lauren Coleman, the cryptozoologist who has the International Cryptozoology Museum in the state of Maine. And at that time, I had a paranormal radio show, and I was just interviewing people, and I didn't know anything about Bigfoot really. Hadn't really thought about Bigfoot before to consider whether he was real or not. But I thought, oh, this would be a good interview. So I was educated by Lauren Coleman at that time. So um oh, you're changing the view around now. um so during the interview he was more scientific than I expected, I guess.
Mhm.
And he really caught my attention, and he had an idea that he thought would be the recipe for success in interacting with Bigfoot. He thought if you could send women into the woods without men, dogs, or guns, that Bigfoot would be a little more likely to come in closer to have a little look see at what's going on over here. So, at the time, I jokingly volunteered to do it, and I was just joking. But by the end of the show, I was like, "All right, you know what? I'm serious. I'm going to try this. I'll get some ladies. We'll go out. We'll give this a try, and we'll see if there's such a thing as Bigfoot in Minnesota." And so that's how it started. And surprise, surprise, I had an encounter, and I was hooked.
Was that on the first trip that you had the encounter?
Was
Amazing.
We went to well, I have a psychic medium too. So in
Oh,
addition
okay.
to Lauren's idea of women in the woods without men, dogs, or guns, I wanted to see if we could use our extra senses to pinpoint the location of Bigfoot a little easier.
Okay.
And that works actually. We
Wow.
found out quickly that that does work. So
huh.
we have different strategies of doing that, but the first time we had gone to a location where there had been a sighting, where a young native man had been fishing off of his canoe on a place called 6 Mile Lake in northern Minnesota. It was on an Ojibwe reservation. And as he was coming in, as it's getting dark, there was a Sasquatch in the shallows of the water up to his knees, and he kept moving aggressively towards the canoe. So he didn't come in close enough, and he just stayed out, and his cell phone had died. He couldn't call for help. And he was out there for 2 hours with this Bigfoot like tracking him along the shore.
Wow.
So finally, somebody from his family realized that he should have been back a long time ago. So they drove out there to see if he was okay. And when they got out there, they started honking the horn and flashing the lights, and the Bigfoot ran into the woods. And so the kid came in, and he was in his early 20s, I think. um, anyway, he noticed the spot where he'd ran into the woods. So the next day they went out and they looked in that area, and there were all kinds of nice Bigfoot prints there. So that brought in the local Bigfoot researchers from the reservation to cast those prints. And it also got the attention of Finding Bigfoot, who came out right away.
Okay.
And so, I mean, all that we knew at that time was that we knew those details. We knew it was from a boat launch. What we were told was a public boat launch. The only public boat launch on that lake was on the side of the lake that had all these homes. And it's a long, skinny lake. and the other side of the lake is all trees and there's no homes or cabins whatsoever. And I was like, that doesn't really make sense to me that it would be over there where all those people are. I think it would make more sense to be over here on the side that's just full of thick trees. And so when we got there, we decided that we were just going to drive around this lake. It's called Reservation Highway 20. Don't let the name fool you. It's a gravel road with one car room. You can't even meet oncoming traffic because somebody's going to have to back up. And the trees are right up on the road. And so we went on, we drove on there during the day. And, I was trying to see if I could feel like a different energy than something that I felt before, trying to hone in on that specific energy of a Bigfoot. And we got to this one spot where we stopped and got out and looked around, and we didn't see anything there that would lead us to believe that Bigfoot would be there, except I kept feeling this weird energy there that I had never felt before. And I'm like, there's just something about this spot. I can't put my finger on what it is, but it feels different to me. So I dropped a GPS pin on it and I said, we're going to come back here and check this place out after dark tonight. And we just kept going around the lake, and we'd stop and look at different places. And we actually did find footprints at the top of the lake that went over this little inlet of water that comes into the top of the lake from a wetland. There's this little homemade bridge that has gravel embedded on it. And when we walked across it, I just felt like turn around and look back. And I turned around and looked back, and there were footprints, this really huge bare feet that were hardened into the gravel. And we didn't see them coming up on them. It was just when we turned around and looked back that you could see them, the shadows were however it was playing on that. And, we were totally unprepared to find footprints. They weren't anything we could have cast anyway. They weren't deep enough for that, but we didn't have casting material. We didn't know how to do that anyway. And we didn't even have like a tape measure with us. So we brought out dollar bills and placed them down, took pictures. Me being the tallest girl there, I was running and leaping next to them to see if I could match the stride, and I'm not even close. And I'm about 5'9". So, my stride is pretty long. I got really long legs. Anyway, so we marked that spot too, that we wanted to return to that spot as well. And, it just made sense to me that the Bigfoot would cross over that little bridge because it's the path of least resistance. And so that would make sense. Animals will do that. They'll cross wherever is the path of least resistance. Anyway, so we went back that night, and it's so dark. We couldn't see anything. And we park the car on that little road in that first spot where I was feeling that strange energy. And one of the girls that I had along, she had borrowed a FLIR camera, a thermal camera from somebody that she knew. And it was just a cheap little FLIR camera that you pull the trigger and it takes a picture. And I had never gotten to play with a thermal camera before, so I was quite excited about this. And she handed it to me to try it out while she went to the back. Everybody else had their backpacks in the back of the hatch. So here's me, I have my stuff on my body, and she hands me this thermal. So I'm standing at the front of the car, and I'm scanning the woods just to see if I can see anything out there that has a body temperature. I was looking for deer, anything. I just wanted to see something. And with this thermal, and I'm scanning, and I pointed, now I'm pointing it out in front of the car, and towards the left side where the trees are, there's somebody standing there. And I was like, oh, who's out in front of the car? And nobody answered. And I just thought one of the girls had got her gear and walked up there. So I said, hey, who's out in front of the car? And nobody answered again. And I just kept asking that over and over, like with more nervousness in my voice, I guess. And Marlo heard what was going on, and she comes running up to the front of the car, and she looks at the screen, and she sees what I'm seeing on the screen, which looks like the body temperature of a person standing there out in front of the car, quite, maybe about 50 feet. And she looks up from the screen and she gasps and she says, "Oh, I just saw eyes." And I was like, "You did?" So I look up to see if I can see eyes because it's so dark. And I didn't see eyes. But then I couldn't find it again on the camera. It was just gone. And so it must have stepped into the woods at that point. So we decided we were going to walk into the woods that way. But let me just tell you one thing, like in hindsight, because I didn't realize this that night or even the next day or the next week, it was a long time later that I realized when Jenna had purchased a nice thermal camera, that I realized when I was using it that when people are wearing clothes, they have a different temperature readout on the thermal. And what I saw that night was not wearing clothes. And I immediately called Marlo and I said, when you saw that screen on the thermal, was it wearing clothes? And she's like, come to think of it, no, it wasn't. Now that we know what that looks like, it wasn't. And so, that was a hindsight realization that whatever was that person that was standing there was not wearing clothing.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of weird if that was a real person, like a human person standing naked in the woods in the middle of the night, way out there where there isn't anybody else. That would be very odd.
Yep.
So, back to that night, so we decided we were going to walk into the woods that way towards the left where we think it disappeared into the woods. And so there was 5 of us that night that were trying this out. And I asked a bunch of girls that I knew that were paranormal investigators because I knew they had night vision cameras and we needed that kind of thing, right? So I just asked ladies to come along that probably already had the equipment or some of the equipment that we might need. And so 3 of us walk into the woods that way, and we didn't get very far before we started hearing some commotion. And something was coming through the branches of the trees and bounced in front of us about 3 feet in front of us. And I looked at it and I was like, "Is that a rock?" And Marlo looks at it. She goes, "I think that is a rock." And we hear something else coming, and here comes another rock landing next to it, and then another one. And you can literally hear it moving through the branches of the trees. And it was like it was getting lobbed over there. And, very good aim. They all landed right next to each other, and they didn't even come near to hitting us. It didn't feel like something was trying to hit us at all. It was just like, it felt like a very clear message, like, don't walk this way. And so I was like, all right, well, maybe we shouldn't walk that way. So we backed up back to the road and we're standing there trying to figure out what to do next. And one of the girls says, "Hey, why don't we do one of those Bigfoot calls like they do on TV?" Now, this is our first time out, right? I said, "Sure, you go ahead and do that." So she lets out a whoop and we're all standing there very quiet, waiting to see if anything responds. And there were no vocals coming back, but something started walking towards us. Not from the left side of the road, but now it's coming from the right.
Okay.
And it's very large. You can hear it's got 2 feet. It's cracking sticks as it's walking. And all of us are pointing our cameras towards the sound. And that's kind of when we realized that all those night vision cameras worked really good inside of haunted houses and buildings, but they didn't really light up the woods very far or deep at all. We couldn't see what was coming. So we're just all frantically trying to see, well, what is it? What is it? And we don't know. But we can tell that it's large and it's coming with 2 feet. And all of a sudden it was like that sound multiplied, and there were multiple creatures coming towards us from different directions. And we circled up back to back facing out, like automatically. And, I kind of looked at us and I thought, we never talked about what we would do if we got into trouble. But this is probably good that we're taking this defensive stance, right? And so we're all standing there and we're just trying to see if we can see what's coming. And they're all very scared. And one of the girls says, Jen, do your tobacco thing, do your tobacco thing. And what she meant was, I'm part Native American. I am part Ojibwe. We were on an Ojibwe reservation, and she was asking me to do like a traditional Ojibwe prayer. So I took my tobacco out in my hand and I started to pray in the Ojibwe language out loud, and very formal prayer and introduction. And I thanked the little people. And then I said, Miigwech Gichisabe, which means thank you to Bigfoot. And as soon as I said that, all that sound just stopped. It didn't like retreat. It just went silent. And I was like, heck yeah, that was awesome. Well, the other girls, they didn't really know what I had said or that it responded to that. They don't speak Ojibwe, so they didn't know what I had said. They just knew it stopped, and they were still very scared. And so they're like, hey, let's go check out that spot where we found those footprints today. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. So we jumped in the car and drove away to that other spot. And, the girls at that point were like, I don't know. This is way scarier than haunted houses. I'm not really sure I want to do this. Maybe Bigfoot could walk out in front of the car and we could get a picture. That would be good.
Yeah.
But I really don't know if I want to be looking for Bigfoot anymore. That's really scary. That's a lot scarier than haunted houses and places like that. So they were very scared, and some of them didn't want to get back out of the car again. And I understand. It was kind of scary. But for me, it was like this adrenaline rush, and I wanted to do more. And now that I felt like, okay, I've gotten a taste that Bigfoot is probably real, now I want to know more. And that's what got me hooked on it. At that time, I went after that the next day we went back out, and I said we have to go back out and see if we can find footprints in that spot. And I got them location. We had 2 different cars, and I had driven to that whole area by myself, where the others lived closer to Minneapolis. And so they were all in one car, and the one who was driving that car decided that she was done. She's not going in that woods. And it's time to go. So nobody else had a choice. They had to leave. And so there I was by myself. And
Hey.
So when I got home from that whole excursion, I had a little lunch date set up with Jenna the next day, and I hadn't told any of my friends that I was doing this because I was kind of embarrassed that I was looking for Bigfoot. And I'm just being honest. And so I didn't tell like my friends that I was doing that, because I thought they already thought I was weird enough. So they probably thought I would just have lost it for doing that. And I told Jenna what happened over the weekend, and she was so mad at me that I hadn't taken her with me. She's like, Jen, I want to do this with you. I want to do this with you. So she's been on board ever since that. And then I asked Tammy to join us too. And the other girls that just, I tried to work it out with them over time, but, they really didn't want to be in the woods at night. They just did not want to. So it just didn't work out with us.
No, I understand.
And Tammy wasn't able to join us right away, but she eventually did when it worked out for her scheduling and everything, that she eventually joined us as well. So the 3 of us make a really good team. All 3 of us have those psychic abilities. And I'm really into remote viewing. And I'm not sure if you know what that is.
Yes, I am familiar with it.
Okay. Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So yeah, that's a fascinating story. And I, it was funny that you mentioned how you got into it and Lauren's recommendation, because that was going to be one of my questions, because I have, over the years, I've seen the correlation between, or the big, seems like Sasquatch do show an interest with women and children. It seems like in a lot of scenarios, or a lot of stories I've heard and encountered. So yeah, that was definitely going to be one of my questions. What your findings have been over time. I mean, do you feel like that has a lot to do with it? And do you feel like they react to you differently, maybe than how they do groups of all men or majority of men?
I do.
Yeah.
I have friends who are investigators that are like all men, and it seems like they get treated a little bit more aggressively.
Okay.
Like instead of little tiny rocks, maybe
Yeah.
dollar size coins or 50-cent piece coins size rocks getting tossed in front of them a few feet, they'll get big rocks being whizzed at their head or at their car and on their car. I'm like, there's a big difference in that.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
I've
Yeah,
never
there
had anything
definitely is.
aggressive like that happen ever.
No.
No. We get those messages of little rocks being thrown. One time we were in Nebraska and we were investigating at Indian Caves Park. We went up to the Indian Caves at night. You have to stay in the park to be in there after dark. And so we were camping there, and we wanted to go up there by the caves in the dark. And it was so quiet that night. It was just silent. And there was no noise except the river flowing. That was it. And as soon as we started walking up the stairs, because there's quite a large stairwell to get way up to where the caves are. As soon as we started walking up the stairs, we get about halfway up, and something's now throwing green acorns at us, at our feet.
Yeah.
And, it didn't stop until we got back, and we kept going up, but it didn't stop throwing them towards our feet until we went back down.
Yeah.
So, definitely something was up there tossing green acorns at us. They weren't falling off trees. They were literally coming at an angle and always just landing by our feet, nowhere else. So, then as soon as we got back down the stairs, it stopped. No more acorns were falling or being thrown. So, we've only had little things thrown at us or towards us, never like directly hitting us, but
Okay. Well, let me ask you, with your psychic abilities and so forth. You said your whole team has some abilities. What is your feeling, or have you had any situations where you feel like there's any communication, or where they try to communicate with you in any way?
Well, that very first time where they stopped coming towards us when I thanked them in the Ojibwe language, that to me was a response.
Okay.
And, I had talked to Native elders from different reservations, different Ojibwe reservations, and received different information from different elders. But one particular elder from the Turtle Mountains Reservation told me that you can pray to Bigfoot and Bigfoot will help you. Like keeping deer off the road when you're driving, or that, and she encouraged me to do that, to pray to Bigfoot for help of this or that.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, okay. And I believe in the things that elders tell me, but I'm still a very logical minded person. I kind of have to see evidence of my things for myself to fully grasp it into, as truth for me. Even though I really feel grateful that they share and those things with me. And even if I never see any of it firsthand, I still hold it as very valuable information. But to be perfectly honest, my logical side of myself, I really need to see something or experience something to really grasp it.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that night when they stopped coming towards us, when I said thank you to Bigfoot,
Yeah.
that to me was evidence that they were correct. That they knew that the girls were scared, and please stop now. Thank
Right.
you, but please stop now.
Mhm.
And so that was good. We had an instance where we were we had found a structure that was a den-like stick structure. It was absolutely huge. It had trees that were pulled out of the ground and teepeed together, and they were very tall, and then there was foliage like weaved in between them into like levels. And that was kind of like a tower, and it was like the end of this structure that had on the back of it had an additional structure like attached to it that was more like a den. And it was so interesting because we found this in Minnesota, and it literally was like trees stacked on top of each other, but then the branches had been weaved together, and it was weaved so tightly that, I mean, it was held together by this weaving, and it literally created this like hut, and it had a roof, and I mean, it was very intricately built and very strong, but it was all just weaved together. Nothing was tied or nailed or screwed together. And I'd never seen anything like it before. And when we found that, we had some encounters there too, where when I was trying to walk away from it to get, it was so large, I was trying to get it into one shot on the camera.
Yeah.
And so I asked Jenna to stand next to it while I walked far enough away to get the whole thing in the camera, which had to get pretty far away. And as I'm walking away from her, there was rocks coming down. And so I stopped and I'm like, okay, they don't want me to walk this way, and we're not alone. And and so I was like, can I walk that way? And so I just started to slowly walk the other way, and I walked like around to get back to where I wanted to be. And that seemed to be okay. And then I started, filming and taking pictures, and was able to get like a measurement of the whole structure with Jenna standing there in her 5'5" tallness and next to it. And then all of a sudden I felt very strongly that we had overstayed our welcome, and I just had this overwhelming sense of fear that just overrushed me. And I was like, it's time to go. And I'm not even going to walk back to Jenna. It's time to go right now. And I'm like, Jenna, get out, just go directly to the car. And I knew that the trail that we drove in on was like parallel to where we were both the same distance from the trail if we both just hightailed it that way. And so I feel like that might have been some kind of communication that you're not welcome here anymore. You need to go.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how I felt, because it was such a strong feeling that, we need to go, and don't even bother walking back that way.
Yeah. And I've heard other stories, similar stories, with people encountering that sudden, almost exaggerated in a way, type
Yes.
fear that's not how you would normally feel in other situations when something startles you, or when you're I've heard that a lot. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And then another time we had been in Tennessee at the Tennessee Bigfoot Conference, and they had set up where people could go out looking for Bigfoot with us as a group, and along with Matthew Delf from Migro.
Mhm.
And it was his research area, so he selected the location. And for me, I don't go a place without looking at it on satellite first. That's like, I can gain information by looking at things through satellite imagery. And so, I mean, I'm normally investigating things from satellite imagery first, and then I go there if I'm seeing that there's a reason to be there. And so just walking out in the woods randomly looking for something just doesn't make sense to me. It's like I'm walking around blind. Like anybody else, that doesn't make sense for me. It's like a waste of my time, I feel like. And so we have much better results if I look at it first, and if I can see Bigfoot on my remote view. I call it geographic remote viewing because I'm looking at specific locations on the satellite imagery, and that's where I'm able to see if there's a Bigfoot here or there, or if there's some evidence there that we could collect. And, I'm doing that through a geographic remote view with the satellite imagery. And Matthew didn't tell us where we were going to go. And I kept saying, I need like GPS coordinates because I need to look at it. And he's like, oh, it'll be fine. I'll take you there. And I'm like, you don't understand. That's not how I do it. And, he didn't tell us. So We didn't know what the coordinates were until we were there. So after we were done with this group of people, I'm remote viewing it during dinner, and because we were back out down into a town and having dinner as a group, the four of us, the three girls and Matthew, and I'm like, listen, I'm seeing Bigfoot here, here, and here, and we should go back up there and go to these spots. And so we did, but now it's dark.
Yeah.
And we parked the car near one of the spots where I'd seen Bigfoot nearby. And then for the first time I'd ever even thought of trying this, I pulled my phone out to see if I still had service up there on this mountain. And I did. So I pulled out my phone, and I'm looking at us right in that spot right now. Like, I can see the blue dot blinking as where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking, is there Bigfoot here right now? And I saw one 30 feet away. And okay, there's one 30 feet that way. And it's really dark. You can't see anything. And like 30 feet that way, 30 feet that way. And Tammy pulls out the FLIR thermal camera. And sure enough, there it is.
There he is.
So we got about 13 minutes of footage of this Bigfoot out there. And at that time, it was interesting because we didn't verbally talk about it at the time. It wasn't until after we were gone. But, after we were gone, I was like, what's weird is none of us walked closer to it. None of us talked about walking closer to it. We just didn't do it. And I asked the others, I'm like, did you have a feeling about that? Or, why didn't you walk closer to it? And everybody said the same thing. It just felt like this was our respectful space. We knew he was there. He knew we were there. And we were just keeping our distance and respectful space. And it was okay. And we just weren't supposed to come closer. So yeah, you can look that up on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is She-Squatchers Official. And that particular video is called She-Squatchers Tennessee Night Expedition, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely want to check that out. That sounds awesome.
I think we uploaded like 6 minutes of it.
So
okay.
What was the Sasquatch doing? Was he just watching you guys just standing there squatting, or?
At the time we thought he was sitting on the ground because you were really only seeing him from his hips up.
Yeah, okay.
And his arms were doing something like this, and the setting that we had it on was black hot, so that means like their skin is going to show up as gray or black.
Mm-hmm.
And then hair shows up as stark white. So
okay.
Your hair, your eyebrows, your eyelashes, every little bit of hair shows up as white. So this Bigfoot showing up as a white because he's all hairy.
Okay.
And whatever he was working with, he was working with something on the ground with his arms, and he kept doing this.
Oh.
And whatever he was working with had a body temperature. It was gray. So I don't know if he was skinning something or what, but he was doing something. We didn't walk back there that night, obviously, but Matthew went back there later during the day. We had to leave because we were just down there for a conference, and we were scheduled to leave the next day. So we didn't get to go back there during the day. But Matthew did. And he walked back to that spot, and he said, right there's this little drop off. And he says, I don't think it was sitting. I think he was standing there and using this shelf like a cupboard, like a countertop. So, because that was like perfect height at this drop off to just stand there and use it like a countertop.
I see.
So that's what he thinks was going on there, because we were only seeing it really from, below the waist up. And before we got the camera to record, because it's Jenna's thermal FLIR Scout camera, and Tammy hadn't really used it a whole lot before, and it's dark, so she doesn't know which button turns it to record. Mm-hmm. And so she's just looking at it going, there's something there. How do I make this record? Mm-hmm. And while she's watching that, it lifted its arm up like this, and she said the hairs were hanging down like this, and it like scratched over here. And she said that was really cool. She wished she could have had that on the recording.
Yeah, that would have been great.
But it was cool for her to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
Do y'all cover several? Do you have quite a few? Do you go around several different states, or do you have specific? Okay.
The majority of my research area is in Minnesota, northern Minnesota. I really like going on Indian reservations, specifically the one that my family comes from, because that is, nobody owns the land on that reservation. It's held in trust by all tribal members. So when we're there, I don't have to stop and go, who owns this piece of land and can we get permission? I don't have to do that. If it's on the reservation, I can go check it out because it's tribal land. And I don't need permission as long as I'm not peeking in anybody's windows, which we wouldn't be doing that, obviously. But we don't have to stop and figure out who owns this. Can we get a hold of them? We don't have to do that. So it makes that a lot easier.
Yeah.
And it's a very unpopulated area, a large, very naturalized place of land, and there's quite a few Bigfoots up there.
Yeah.
How often do people contact you to come check stuff out?
It's interesting. People are pretty tight-lipped about that kind of thing up here. And I have more people telling me that their friend saw Bigfoot, but they're kind of scared to tell people about it. And they'll tell me like what lake it was on. I had one client tell me that their friend was snowmobiling on Bad Medicine Lake in Minnesota and saw somebody like jump down behind these bushes on the shoreline as he was coming towards that area. And he thought it was his son or his friend that were going to jump out and scare him as he came by. He thought that they were just like waiting to like jump out and scare him as he's driving by. So he roars up to this bush and like slams on the brakes. He's like, "Gotcha, I know you're back there." He did. And this Bigfoot like stood up in shock and like ran away.
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah, that's
So that scared the guy too, because that was quite the shock, because he really thought it was somebody that was just going to jump out and scare him as a joke.
Bigfoot was just as shocked as he was.
Right?
I didn't think you knew it was back here.
funny.
That is funny.
So that's kind of sometimes I hear those kinds of things, and we could go check that out, but people on the reservations typically don't report their Bigfoot sightings because they feel it's some spiritual message to them that they saw the Bigfoot. So they'll usually, if they have questions or they want to talk to somebody, they usually go talk to their spiritual advisor about it to see what that might mean to them in their personal life. And because they take it as a private message that they saw this. And so a lot of times they don't talk about those things. On my reservation in particular, sometimes people will contact me because they know that I'm interested in that, and they'll tell me something or they'll share pictures with me. But a lot of times they don't want to tell you a whole lot. There was one gentleman, or a husband and wife that I know very well. They're elders in the community. They're very respected people. And I was working up on the reservation doing a contract for the American Indian Sexual Assault Advocacy Coalition. And so they came and they knew I was at this event, and they came and had breakfast with me. And he said, "Hey, Jen, I know you've been looking for Bigfoot." And I'm like, "Yeah. Do you have any stories, traditional stories or anything to share?" And he said, "Well, my granddaughter's found something in the forest." And I'm like, "Okay." He goes, "Well, do you know where I live?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I kind of know where you live." And he said, "Well, behind our house is the woods." And I'm like, "Yep." And he said, "Well, the granddaughters were back there walking in the woods like they do, and they're like 9 years old at the time. And they came back home really excited because they found this really cool fort." And so they're talking all about this really cool fort that they found. And he said, "That doesn't sound, like a fort. Why don't you show it to me?" So he had the girls take him back there. And he said it scared the crap out of him to see what they found. Something had pulled the 2 trees out of the ground and teepeed them upside down together with the roots in the air. And he says, you walk underneath that and you just keep going. And he says, then there's like a Hogan structure. And I'm like, what does that look like to you? Like a Hogan structure? And he said, it's like trees that were like they were stacked together, but weaved together and into like a rectangular shape. And he said there was a doorway, but no door. And it was a very large structure. It was very much like the one that we found. It was a different one though. And he said that they went and the girls had gone inside of it when they found it. And inside of it in the back, there was a hole in the ground that went down into this tunnel / cave area that had been dug, like a den. And the girls went down in there when they found it. And so when he saw this, he didn't go down inside of it. You know, he went in and he looked down the hole and he was like, no. And he rushed the kids away from there and he's like, don't you ever come near this again. If you find anything like this again, you don't even go near it ever. And, this was very bizarre for them to be saying such things to the kids because most of the time in those very traditional Native families, which they are a very traditional Native family, they're teaching the children that they're always surrounded by their relatives in the forest. You know, the trees and the grass and the animals are your relatives. And, you feel very comfortable there even when you're all alone. And for them to be like, don't go there, it was like a completely different story all of a sudden.
Right.
So yeah, that was very interesting. And that's why we started looking up in that area back in those areas. And that's where I started finding those den-like structures in the remote views. And we started going up there and, I'd literally I'd see a remote view and we'd go there and there was one there.
Have you found any more with the underground?
We found one that had like a dug down area, but it wasn't like a den. It was dug down area with trees laying on the top. But it wasn't like that one that the girls had found.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I've heard other people mention that they think that they go underground a lot, or and of course in our areas down here, there's really not a whole lot of spots they could go underground. But
I've also heard stories where they'll dig little hollows in the ground, and then to hide, they'll go into them and cover themselves up with whatever's available.
In Minnesota, where this was, we get some brutal winter weather. And, being in that particular location, there isn't enough shelter in the wintertime to keep warm in the 50 below weather. They would have to go underground to stay warm.
Yeah.
They, like bears dig dens. They would have to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Depends on what part of the country you're in and what kind of weather they're dealing with.
Right. Yeah, and I've also heard, and I don't know if you've seen any indication of them climbing trees. I've heard quite a few stories and talked to people who have either seen them or caught them on thermal up in trees, or had them jump out of trees.
I think that when they're throwing the rocks, I think sometimes they are actually up in the trees.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the feeling that I get now from that, because when you're looking through a thermal and you're looking on the ground level, you're not seeing anything. It's probably because they're up higher.
Have you had them come into your campsites any when y'all been out, or?
We had an instance where we had coyotes and stuff coming into our camp, but not anything that I'm aware of that they were actually in our tenting area.
Yeah.
Bears at my tent a couple years ago. That was interesting. Sniff at the door.
Minnesota,
huh?
A lot of bears in Minnesota, huh?
Yes, we have bears in Minnesota, especially up on the reservation because they don't hunt them there.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Multiply.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Now, how
most of the bears eat at the garbage dump, so they're completely used to humans,
Yeah.
and they really don't bother humans at all, except for what did you bring me?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
What's in your garbage bag?
how big is your reservation?
It's very large. It has the largest body of fresh water completely contained in the United States, Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians up in northern Minnesota.
Okay.
Okay.
And it's one of the very few reservations left that didn't cede to the government. So once you cross the border, you're not fully 100% in America anymore. They have their own laws and yeah. So it's different than most of the other reservations where Native people owned the land and then they sold it.
Yeah.
Where on this reservation you can't own land, you can use land. You can get like a land use permit to use the land to live on or build on or live in the house, but you don't actually own the land because the land is held in trust by all tribal members.
Let's see. Interesting.
That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
I've always curious how it worked on reservations. I know I'm a courier for FedEx Express, and I've delivered to reservations before, and I noticed that they have their own medical facilities and that kind of stuff. I always wondered how it worked.
Most reservations, the Native people were given allotments of land where they owned it, and then when they down and out, they sold it. So
Okay.
a lot of the tribal lands don't even belong to the Indians anymore, but which is sad.
Yeah, it's very sad.
That is.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that didn't happen on my reservation. My reservation, they weren't allowed to own the land, so
Yeah.
couldn't sell
That's
it.
good.
So how often are y'all getting out now? Are y'all getting out quite a bit?
Well, my reservation actually closed its borders for COVID. They had literally had people at the border going, "Why are you here?
Get in there. Oh,
Here." If you didn't live there and you didn't have a good reason to be there, you weren't allowed to come on there.
yeah.
So, going bigfooting was not a good enough reason. They they were trying to keep COVID out of the reservation, and it got up there anyway eventually. But they were really, really trying to keep the people safe from it up there. And they've been opening the borders now more, so I think we're going to be able to start going up there again soon. In the meantime, I've been doing when we haven't been able to get out into the field, I've been doing more remote viewing for other teams that are able to get out.
Oh, okay. Really?
Like just this week and last week, I was doing some remote viewing for the Ohio Night Stalkers and looking at some areas that they've been going to or want to go to, and telling them what I see there and marking spots on their maps and telling them this is where they go to the water and this is where they have the children and this is where they
Really?
there's a really big one that hangs out right here. And
is all you need is a national forest map to do that?
all I need is GPS coordinates.
Really?
GPS coordinates to an area that you're interested in, and then I'll look at it.
Good to know.
And yeah,
That
it
is-
takes
that's-
some
that's pretty-
time.
Hmm.
Especially if it's a big area. It takes some time to look at it. So the closer to an area of interest, the better. And I had like a gentleman contact me a few years back, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and he gave me coordinates to a place in North Carolina. And when I first looked at it, I was really thrown off by how different everything looked because they had different kinds of trees than we have up here.
Mhm.
And so that really, like, it was odd for me to look at these. It just looked so different to me.
Yeah.
And so I had to like put it back down and go back to it later. And then I went, a lot of times I like to do this in the middle of the night because then my phone isn't ringing off with messages and people aren't trying to get a hold of me. And, the energies are just more calm at night when people are sleeping. And then I can look at things and be undisturbed. And it's kind of like an altered state of consciousness when you do that kind of thing. So you just kind of have to get in the zone of it. And when you're constantly getting messages or phone calls, you're snapped out of the zone all the time. So I try to do it in the middle of the night when I have that time, that peaceful time. And then I just I take screenshots of the satellite imagery of what I'm looking at, screenshot it, and then I can send it to somebody and I can mark on that picture where it is, like what I'm noticing, and tell them what I'm seeing there. And so this gentleman contacted me from North Carolina, and he asked if I would do remote viewing for him, and he sent me coordinates to a location of interest. And I started looking around that area, and I was seeing like a Bigfoot jumping up and down on the side of this lake. And I'm like, all right, so there's a Bigfoot here that is not hiding. He's probably, if you watch this area, you can probably see him, because he's often moving around out there, right out in the open. But there's ones behind him that further back that they're more hiding. They're more discreet. But this one, if you watch that area, you're going to see him. And I said, and he's also going over into this field, open field there. I said, if you watch that area, you'd see him there too. And I said, right over here, and it was like on the other side. And I dropped a GPS pin, and I said, where they're crossing the road right here, because they actually live over there. So they're crossing the road right here. And after I did all this for him, and I'm telling him all this different stuff, that these different spots, he's like, you're right. They crossed the road right there. Here's video on the ground, and he was already researching that area. So I was not telling him anything he didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was very, very interesting. I love that kind of feedback, when you can get those confirmations, and that's always fun. Like when I was doing some for the Ohio Night Stalkers, and I don't tell people where I'm looking at things. I might say the state, but I'm not going to tell you where.
Right.
So I've been looking at some different locations for them, and I have done that before, and I'm like, okay, so there's like less of them there right now, but now they're over here. And it was fun, because he's like, yeah, that's where they were throwing rocks from last time we were there, is that area right there where you said they're at. And I'm like, yep, that's where they are. And so it's fun to get that feedback where they're actually getting interactions there.
That's really fascinating. Do you ever find yourself just going out and checking certain areas just to see, or states or that you're just curious about?
If I can get there. Like, we do a lot of speaking at conventions and conferences, and if we can stay longer than the convention, we like to go out to other people's hotspots and check them out. Okay. And that's afforded us a lot of the ability to be in other states, investigate in other states where we don't live, and that's really been an awesome blessing for us, really.
Right. But it's like, as far as remote viewing, do you ever? Do you just ever think of certain areas that you haven't been, or that you haven't heard reports, or say national park? Do you ever go just out on your own remote view, say Yosemite, for example?
I have remote viewed different places, not specifically looking for Bigfoot. This was something I was doing prior to even looking for Bigfoot. I would always look at places that way. Yeah. But if I get curious about a place, just in general, I'll look at it on the satellite imagery. I never go anywhere without looking at it from above first, which is probably a weird obsession of mine. But it's kind of always been that way. Before there was Google Earth or Google satellite imageries, there were atlases, and I was obsessed with having them.
It's kind of nice to know what you're getting into, and what, kind of what your, route is, or what your route, possibilities are.
Mm-hmm.
That is.
So that's fun for me when I can't get out there by myself, and I enjoy that part of it, and that's really my big part of the research, is finding the spots where they are. And my whole strategy with that is find them where they are, drive as close as you can get to it, and then jump out and go there quick. Because I think most times people are just meandering about in the forest, and they're not necessarily sure that Bigfoot is right there, so they're not really looking for that. Yeah. And I think they can easily hide from people who aren't specifically looking with an awareness that they would be there. But for me, I'm like, they're right there. Let's go.
Yeah.
So, that's been working for us. And I know that people get skeptical of that kind of thing. Jenna definitely was very skeptical of, she didn't believe in remote viewing when I first started saying they're right there. If we get out of the car right here, they're within 100 feet, there's going to be something right there, right here, if we just go straight out this way. And she was like, uh-huh. I'm like, let's go, come on. And she was in shock to find that that was where that big den-like stick structure was. And she was like, what? It's like you knew it was here. I said, didn't I tell you there was something here? I just didn't know what it was. I was asking for Bigfoot evidence that we could collect, and this whole area like lit up. And I was like, all right, there's something there. I didn't know what it was till we got there, but so
go ahead, Josh.
Have you ever come across anything that didn't seem like Bigfoot, like maybe another cryptid?
Like little people?
Let's say, for example, like dogmen or I don't know.
No, I haven't
or
come
even
across
little people.
dogmen, and I'm not exactly sure I want to. Because I hear that they're more aggressive, and that's not really my thing.
Right.
So I'm not really sure I want to like put that out there that I would be looking for that at all. Because I think sometimes when you start looking for something, it starts looking back.
Yeah, and I've heard that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I'm not really looking for that. But I have seen little people.
Okay.
And our tribe is very connected to them, and I'd seen them prior to Bigfoot. That I'd seen them out in the lodge area of my elder, out the sweat lodge area out there. And when I say it's a long story, but definitely I was pointing, going, what do you see right there? And what do you see right there? And he's like, oh, those are the little people. And I'm like, because I'm very specific about the way I ask questions when I'm asking, what is that? I don't say, do you see that little person right there? I don't say that. I'm like, what do you see right there at the base of that tree? And and then wait for them to tell me, because I think sometimes I don't ask leading questions at all. I'm like, tell me what you see right there.
Can you describe them a little bit?
That particular instance was, we were in the outdoor classroom, and my elder was teaching a class, and I looked at this particular tree, and at the base of it, it looked like somebody had carved 5 little faces, like the size of a softball each, into the bottom of the tree. And they were all just looking so joyous and happy and polished. And I was like, who the heck did that? And when did they do that? I've never seen that before. And I just knew something was very off.
Yeah.
And so I just kept staring at it. And then we went to like break, and I walked to my elder and I pointed at it, and I said, what do you see at the base of that tree right there? And he says, oh, those are the little people. And I'm like, please explain. And they're carved into the tree? He says, no, they just look like that. He says they're standing next to the tree and blending their energy with the tree, so they look like they're part of the tree. They're here to help me with the class. They're going to be gone later. I'm like, oh, okay.
Normal day for them, huh?
Huh?
Just normal day to day for them.
I guess.
They're used to it.
And so then we broke for lunch, and I took my eyes off of it for a little bit, and I looked back, and it was gone. They were gone. And that was really cool. That was cool. And so I'm always like looking at the trees now, like waiting to see if I see them.
I mean, I haven't really followed that subject. Are there a lot of sightings, or is there a story kind of?
Yes.
Related to
he chose that particular spot in the woods for his sweat lodge area because he said he felt the little people there, and that they would help him with the work that he was going to do there with people. Help with healing the people. And so he built a sweat lodge out there, and they've been helpful. They'd been helpful to him. He actually decided to build a meditation walk further back through the woods that loops around and comes back again. And so he was hiring people to go back and start clearing the path for the meditation walk that he had marked. And people would work a day or two, and then they would just be gone. And he couldn't get people to stay on the job, and he finally tracked some people down. And he's like, "Why did you leave? Am I not paying?" He started paying people more than he was paying before, and he's like, "Am I not paying you enough? What's going on here?" And they're like, "No, there's little people back there, and they won't leave us alone, freaking us out." So they were getting scared off by these little people back there.
That's funny.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wonder if they mess with them, or they just saw them.
Yeah, I think they just saw them, and they just like kept coming around to see what are you doing, because they live back there, you know.
Yeah.
And I think people are, if the people are very respectful of that kind of thing, they're like, "Oh, sorry, I'm out of here," you know.
How tall are we talking about? Like the ones you saw? Would you guess?
They were probably less than 2 feet tall, 18 inches to 2 feet tall.
Okay.
Oh wow. Okay.
And yeah, but there are another kind of them that look like Bigfoot, but they're only 3 feet tall at the maximum height.
Okay.
And they're full grown. The Dakota Sioux call them the Chihotanas.
Okay.
And they're the little people of the wooded trees. And so there's different kinds of little people.
Yeah.
And but these ones specifically look like Bigfoot, but they're full grown at 3 feet tall.
Now, I've also heard of, and it may be a different creature, but I've heard of a small, similar, it looks like a Sasquatch that's real small, that's very aggressive. But there's a name for it, and I can't remember what it is. And I don't know if that might be the same thing you're talking about or not.
Chihotanas, I don't know that I've never experienced them as being aggressive.
Okay.
But they're very much into nature and keeping the balance. And so if you're doing something not good for the woods, they probably wouldn't like that.
Yeah.
And then you might have an issue. But I've never had that experience before.
Huh.
So
that's interesting.
So like a Dakota Sioux had come to me and told me that if I wanted to find Bigfoot, I just needed to go to Sicha Hollow in South Dakota. And they were there with the Chihotanas. And he's the one who explained to me what the Chihotanas were. And it's pronounced Chihotana, but it's actually spelled Canotina. Canotina. And he said that they are the little people of the wooded trees, and the Bigfoots are always nearby. And I'm like, okay, so they look like little Bigfoots. Are you sure they're not just baby Bigfoots? It's like, nope, they're completely different, but they're usually nearby each other down there. So
there's some kind of relationship between the two, I guess, of some sort.
Yes. And most reservations and tribal people will say that there is a connection between the little people and the Bigfoots.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask, based off everything you've seen and encountered, what do you think Bigfoot is?
What do I think Bigfoot is? I'm very open-minded, because I don't think we know for sure exactly. So the truth is out there, and I'm hoping that we understand it at some point. But until then, I can only speculate what I think. I do think that Bigfoot is, a physical being, that I do think that they are a people. They're not an animal. I think that they are a people. And I think that they show that like, not necessarily human people, but they are a people. Different than us, but somewhat the same. And I think that they show that they're intelligent by the fact that they completely avoid us. They could hurt us if they wanted to, very easily hurt us, right? But they are smart enough not to, because if they hurt us, somebody's going to come in there looking for them, right?
Right.
So I think that alone shows their great intelligence, that they're avoiding us like the plague.
I think they're humored by us too, because you hear a lot of them coming up to, the houses and knocking on, slapping houses and taking a peek through the window or doing different stuff. Sometimes, I don't know, it's almost like they get their kicks out of it.
I'm sure that looking in the window and seeing people staring at a box with light coming out of it is just the most ridiculous thing. They can't figure it out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, look at those people. They're just sitting there staring at the light.
Yeah. I'm looking through the window, just thinking I'm gonna wait for him to look at me, so they'll just be scared to death, so I can have my laugh for tonight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, our tribe talks about Bigfoot living the most honest life, that Bigfoot lives the most honest life that there is. And so he lives true to himself and true to nature and just an honest, good life.
Yeah.
And so we should, I mean, that's a lot of the teaching about that. So
Sounds like a monk.
a monk,
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Living the honest life.
Mhm.
Not being attached to anything.
Yeah, yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, we have mortgages and we pay money to have this little built somewhere
Right.
that we live in, and you know, all this stuff that we're mortgaged to the hilt to do, where a little bird just flies to a tree and builds a nest and there it's home. You know, I mean, does it make sense that we do that?
I don't know.
Well, I think there's a lot of things we do that, if you think about it close enough, it doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, that's true.
So
But we do have a conference coming up.
tell me, what about that?
Uh, July 17th. Sorry, I was having a brain fart. It's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's only one day. And we've got quite a lineup of speakers.
I'm going to tell you right now that She-Squatchers is not on that list.
Well, if you want to be, we would love to have you.
Make that happen.
I could make that happen.
Who's on the lineup that y'all have now, Josh?
Here, I'll pull it up and let me see here. Let me see if I can pull it up on the screen. I haven't done this yet. I know Robert Kreider's going to be there. Ken Gearhard is going to be there. Carrie Arnold from Bigfoot Odyssey is going to be there. Let me pull up the poster, then I can read everything a lot better. But we would love for you guys to come, and if you wanted to speak, we could definitely fit a spot in for you.
Might have to do that next year because I'm looking at our schedule right now, and we're scheduled to be in Duluth on 9th and 10th in Duluth, Minnesota, and then we're going to be in speaking at the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, July 24th.
Okay.
So that might be a little tight. But we could set something up maybe for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be awesome. Oh, here's the list right here. We're going to have Cliff Brackman, Igor Burtsev, of course, Ken Gearhard, then Adam Davies, Jason Kinsey, Miranda Young, Janice Carter, and Carrie.
Jason Kinsey's coming?
Yes.
I love him. I can't believe he's coming down to the States. That's awesome.
Yep. Yeah, he's coming to the conference. We also have some Michigan people that will be speaking. We got, of course, our very own Val Zavala. And then we got Robert Daigle, Shaitan Noor, Steve Ward, and Robin McCrae.
Okay. Very awesome. Maybe we'll have to discuss this after the show.
Well, feel free to message me. I'm the one in charge of the poster and a lot of stuff going on with the conference. So I would love to have you guys.
Somebody.
And I would love to meet y'all.
Somebody's in Duluth. Hey, I'm going to be in Duluth for the Perry Unity Conference in July. Come out and see us. We'd love to hear about it. Maybe even if it's close to Duluth, so we could maybe run out there and look at it with you.
There you go. Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome.
So our website is She-Squatchers.com. And if anybody would like to contact me, they can sure contact me through the website, and that'll connect you to my email, which is She-Squatchers@yahoo.com. But She-Squatchers.com is everywhere you need to be to find out how to contact us and send us an email or reach out somewhere, Facebook, YouTube. Please follow our YouTube channel. We're having a YouTube race with another YouTuber who challenged us to a race of subscribers. So please come subscribe to our channel at She-Squatchers Official.
Okay.
I will definitely be doing that after this.
I will as well.
Thank you. That's awesome. Every week we try to have a show where we're interviewing somebody about Bigfoot, something.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're not usually talking about ourselves. We do that on everybody else's show.
Yeah, you ever have to make it down to Texas one of these days?
Yes, yes. Actually, Jenna used to winter in Texas, so I used to go down there with her for a while.
Yeah, we got some good spots. Got the big thicket down here, and quite a bit of activity there in Sam Houston.
Mm-hmm.
Which Sam Houston's not that far out of Houston. It's hard to believe, but there's a lot of activity in that.
Yeah, I'd say the big thicket's almost right on par with Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, it's a
pretty hot area for not just Sasquatch, but other strange things.
Yeah.
I love other strange things. Prior to doing Bigfoot, I was doing paranormal stuff. So
Well, I know there's a road that goes through the big thicket that's supposed to be one of the most haunted roads in America. I can't think of the road right now. Would have to look.
Saratoga. It's out of Saratoga, and they call it the Saratoga Lights. They talk about the Saratoga Lights.
Yep, those two. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all.
All kinds of UFOs seen out there, and all kinds of weird stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We were out there a couple weekends ago doing some research. It's a little spooky out there.
Is it? Did you see the lights?
I have not. That was the first time I've been to the big thicket, and I spent 2 hours of that after I got my truck stuck, and took us, and I was there for the day. A couple of other guys stayed overnight, but I couldn't stay for the night. And yeah, it turned out to be a big mess, but we're going to get back out there some more. Most of the places I've been, Sam Houston, Oklahoma, in the whole Nubby area up in Oklahoma. Had some experiences up there.
I've heard that's a really hot spot down there.
Yeah,
a lot of people want us to go down there.
Yeah, I think they're all over the place. I've had some strange things up there happen, and but yeah, that whole area, I think they're just everywhere up there. I mean, that whole community, it's just way of life for them.
Mm-hmm.
They all know they're there, and that's just the way it is. Pretty fascinating.
Fun stuff. Fun
Yeah,
stuff.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, Josh,
Very fun.
What'd you say, Dad?
I said, you got anything?
I don't know. Do any of the viewers have any questions? You're welcome to ask any. You just put them in the comments, and
say to the one in Duluth, hey, the Para Unity Conference is going to be, I think it's the weekend. It's like July 9th and 10th in Duluth, and Lauren Coleman is going to be there. So if you're interested in that, it's mostly paranormal type conference, but they're throwing the Bigfooters in there too with us. So if you're interested in that, you should come check it out.
Hey, real quick, give us a good story or some things when you're doing paranormal research. Some of the a couple of some interesting experiences.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
Okay, so well, I started to do remote viewing for paranormal investigation teams when they would go out. Before they would go out to a spot, they would ask me to look at it. And I was doing a remote view on this one particular location, and all they would just give me was an address or GPS coordinates, and I would look at it. And I saw in this one particular house, I saw like a spirit bear looking at itself, not wanting to be there. And then I saw 3 Indians like staring at this bear. And I said, they're like in line. There's one with the feathers on his head, and then there's one with the wolf pelt on its head, and the other one has bison fur horns. And they're all just staring at this bear. Then I saw a hunter running at me, yelling about something they never should have done. And then I saw a dead human body in the house. And I was like, what is, you mean someone who was cremated? And nope. there's a dead human body in the house. It's not cremated and it's not buried, and they did not kill that. I mean, I was asking all the questions. They did not kill this person. They do know that it's there. It's not buried, not cremated. And I was like, that's not even possible. And I kept getting that answer. I kept getting that same thing over and over and over. And I'm like, whatever. I don't think that's even possible, but I wrote it down. And then I saw these weird spirits that were like raging through the house, and they weren't human spirits. I'm like, what is that? I've never even seen that before. And I, had to do a lot of asking of questions and narrowing down what it was. And I finally determined that they were tree spirits, and they were really mad at these people. And they were the ones causing the issues for them in their house. And so I gave this information to this team leader of this paranormal team who was going to go there. And he's like, oh, I don't know, Jen, that just doesn't sound. I'm like, I don't know. That's what I got. Maybe I'm not good at this. Who knows? So he went there, and then he called me and he's like, Jen, you're not going to believe this. I walk into this house and the first thing that I see is this giant stuffed bear. And he said, and across the wall from that are these 3 masks, these Indian masks with the feathers, the wolf pelts, and the bison fur with the horns, and they're staring at the bear. And he said, then I went down to the basement, and he says, it is filled with dead animals that are completely mutilated. This guy was killing them because he was trying to learn how to do taxidermy. And so he was just killing animals, trying to figure out how to do it. And he was really bad at it. And it was just filled with these really mutilated animals. So that was the hunter telling me something they should never have done.
Yeah.
And then he says, you're not going to believe it. They have a dead human body in the house. I said, no way. He said, yeah. He says, I said, tell me how? And because I couldn't accept that was true. I was like, that can't be true. And he said they purchased a mummy from a museum that went out of business. So they did have a dead human body in their house.
Yeah.
And then he says, get this. They never had any problems paranormal, nothing with a haunting ever before, until the tree in the front yard fell over, and all of a sudden all hell broke loose in their house.
Really?
The tree spirits were in the house. And they were mad at all this killing of the animals for no reason.
Wow, that's something else.
So that was one of the experiences I had with remote viewing for paranormal team. But like in person, when I would go to investigation myself, sometimes people would bring me in to work with spirits that were lost. And I went to one particular spot in Walcott, Minnesota. There was an asylum there for developmentally disabled children, like teenage children.
Mm-hmm.
More like a work farm where they could try to do work and support themselves in some way at this asylum. And it just ended up to be a really abusive place. And some of the girls would be having babies with whoever raped them, and then they would bury the babies in the graveyard unmarked, whether they were dead or not. It was just a bad deal, and the place got shut down a long time ago. Well, the place is so haunted, and there aren't really many of the buildings left standing, but there are a couple. And the place is so haunted that even the neighboring farms are complaining about it because it's affecting their homes and everything.
Right.
So they asked if I could come in there and help. And most of these spirits were these children that died there. And they were some very aggressive ones. But there was one that this paranormal investigator had been talking to on a spirit box, and her name was Emily. And he said she's very sweet. And he's like, if you can do anything and help any of them, please just help Emily. If you can help anyone, help Emily. So we went there together, and he's got his K2 meter there, and he was trying to talk to Emily, and I had my hand like on his shoulder, and all of a sudden I saw her peek out from underneath my arm, And I said, she's right behind you. And he turned the K2 meter and he was able to measure her height.
Really?
And then he was trying to explain to her why, because he had developed like this friendly relationship with her. She really liked him. And she was developmentally disabled as a child when she died. And she didn't, from what I took away from it, she didn't really understand that there was another place to be after she died. And so she was just kind of stuck there. She didn't really understand that there was another place to be. And so he was trying to tell her that he brought me there to help her go away. And she wasn't understanding that. I'm like, she doesn't understand that. And so I was started talking to her and convinced her that it would be okay for her to go through this light. And then she would be free to do whatever she wants at that point. And she could go anywhere, and was able to help her cross over. And it was really cool because the other people that were there, they felt it. Everybody there felt it when she crossed over. They were all, tearing up, and it was a very moving thing. But what was interesting is, we worked with other kids there, and the aggressive spirits too was actually just a very angry young man who I talked to when we were there. I'm like, why are you mad? And he's like, nobody ever loved me. I didn't get to have a mom. And, I was like, oh, I can love you, I could do that, and helped him too, because he just always felt like he wasn't accepted by anybody. And that's all what he needed to move along. And it was interesting because there were so many spirits that we couldn't do it for everybody, but we did help as many as we could at that time. And when they went back there again, at a later date, and of course it's much further away than where I live. They live closer to it. But they went back there again, and they, on the spirit box recording, they had another little girl who started asking, where's Emily? Where did Emily go?
Is that right?
Yeah. So the other spirits were literally asking, where did Emily go?
Wow, that's something else.
And so they have those recordings. Where's Emily? Where did Emily go?
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So that's just one of the examples of things that happened. And
Yeah. Huh.
so does that help you?
Yeah, I mean, that very interesting. Very interesting. So do you do that much anymore, or you just, once you got into bigfooting, you kind of
Once I got into bigfooting, I kind of got really interested in that, and it overtook me in my obsessions, I guess. But if I do still a little bit, if somebody asks for help with something, I sometimes will help with it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't understand that when you do that kind of work as a psychic medium, and I was told this when I was younger by another psychic medium. She said, they're drawing on your energy. You're giving up your life energy to them. And I'm like, nah, because I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it draining. I feel it draining now.
Okay.
Now that I'm older, I feel it draining now. And I do feel really tired after I do that work.
Okay.
And I did have some medical issues in 2017. And after that happened, when somebody asked me for help, I said, because they said this girl's daughter was slapped. And I said, okay, take a picture of each one of them alone, but I want to see the room around them and send it to me. And I'll see what's there. And, when I looked at the picture, I saw who was there. And it instantly made me sick. Like I wanted to throw up. And every time I looked at it, I was like, I just can't do it. I'm not healthy enough to do this right now. And so I had to hand it over to somebody else to look at, because I'm like, I see somebody there, but I can't even keep looking at it. I can't. And, can you look at this for me? And, I told the people, I'm sorry, I'm not in a good way to help you right now. I need to step away from that kind of thing for a while.
Yeah.
So I'm a lot better now. But I did really have to step away from it because I could really feel it when I was really really struggling just to be alive myself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when did you realize you had that ability?
My first memory of knowing that I had abilities of doing things, I was 2.
Is that right?
And
Oh.
I remember very specifically that my grandfather was going to die. And I knew he was going to die. And I kept trying to climb up to get to him because I knew that if I could get close enough to him, he wouldn't die. And I would climb up his bed, and I'd get right up to him, and my mom would put me on the floor. And I'd be like, ugh. And I'd start climbing again.
Yeah.
And, I told this story quite a few times, and then my mom heard me telling this story. She's like, what are you talking about? You knew Grandpa was dying. We didn't know Grandpa was dying. He had a heart attack and he died. And I just always assumed that I knew that he was dying because they told me that he was dying. But I guess I just knew that he was dying. I just sensed it.
Yeah.
Because at the same time, I knew that if I could be close enough, he wouldn't die.
Huh.
So, that was my first memory of it. But then, other things would happen as a small child that, your parents realize something's different. And, when you shock them by saying so-and-so just died, and they did, and, you're telling them before they find out, they get kind of scared by that.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah.
So as a little kid, I learned what scared my parents, and I tried really hard not to talk about those things. And I just tried to be normal.
Gotcha.
Because not normal was scary to them.
Yeah.
And energetically, it felt like rejection. Like it felt like a big push back when I scared them with something like that.
Yeah.
It felt like I got pushed away. And I didn't like that. So my quest was always to be normal and to fit in. And so I hid this stuff as much as I could most of my life. And even as an adult, I was still trying to hide it and trying to make it go away, and definitely not embracing it. And, things would happen that I couldn't ignore. I would know somebody was going to die if they didn't do something. And, so I would break down and start crying and go, you need to go to the hospital right now.
Yeah.
Right now. You got to go right now.
Yeah.
And, they're like, why? And I'm like, you just have to go. Go now. And, I was right. They were dying. They just didn't know.
Yeah.
But, things like that I couldn't ignore.
Right.
But
sounds like a pretty big burden.
It when I started accepting it in my 30s. And when I finally opened my arms and let it happen, like without resistance, without a lot of resistance, because I didn't always fully accept it either. But when I became more open to letting it happen, it seemed like it took over a lot of my life. And, when I was being approached more by spirits, some of them are really insistent. They don't take no for an answer. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to go tell my neighbor that,
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Go away. And, they don't want to go away. They want you to go tell them this, and I'm like, no, that's my neighbor. They'll tell my husband. I'll be in trouble. So that was, when I opened myself to it and became more accepting of it, and I came out of the psychic closet.
There you go.
It was hard for me. It was really hard for me to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But now it's like, well, here I am. Take me or leave me. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, there you go.
I did work on missing persons cases for a while.
You did.
Kind of fell into it by accident. Actually, the first person that I found, I didn't even know was missing. I just kept dreaming about, I kept flying over this river, and I knew which river because I recognized the houses along the river. I'm like, there's my aunt's house. And I was counting the bends in the river towards town. And I'm flying over this, again, I've always been obsessed with seeing things from the air. So even in my dreams, sometimes I'm flying in the air, looking down at things. Anyway, so I was flying through the air, and I come to this one part in the river, and I dove into the water, and I'm trying to get down to the thing that sunk so I could drive it back up. And I'd always wake up before I reached it. And I'd think that was the stupidest dream ever. You cannot drive something back up after it sinks, right? You can't. And I was always like, that's so dumb. But I had this dream over and over and over again. It was a very specific space in the river. It was always the same. And I would always wake up going, that's so dumb. You can't drive something up after it sinks. But then I thought, you know what? This is happening over and over and over again. I think there's something in the river there. So I called my cousin and I said, hey, I'm having this dream. And she knew that I was gifted. Her sister is gifted too, but her sister's scared of it.
Wow.
And I said, hey, can you ask your sister if she's dreaming about something in the river over here? I said, there's something down there. And she asked her sister, and she wasn't dreaming about it. And I said, listen, there's something down there. This is the dream that I'm having. And I told her, I keep swimming, trying to get down to the thing so I can drive it back up, the thing that sunk. And I'm like, so dumb. But I think there's something down there. And, my positive self was thinking, it might be a treasure. Let's go find it.
Yeah.
And I asked her if the ice was still good on the river. I was going to come out there with my husband's ice auger and throw a camera down there, an ice fishing camera. And she said, no, the ice is breaking up now. You can't do that. And I'm like, oh, bummer. And so I just let it go. Well, then she called me, like a couple months, I don't know how long, a month or two later. And she called me crying and she's like, they found her right where you said she'd be. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, Gina Anderson, they found her in the river right where you said she'd be in her car. Wow. And there was a woman who had been missing for a year and a half, and I didn't know that anybody was missing. I don't live there.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't watch the news either. And apparently she had gone missing one day, and she apparently had epilepsy. She had a seizure and drove into the river and died in her car, and nobody knew. And my cousin had said something about right there in the river, and they checked, and there she was in her car at the bottom of the river.
Wow.
So that was an accident. That first one was an accident. And then after that, I was doing a radio interview with someone down by Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it was a paranormal radio show. And he said, I know some people that are working on this missing persons case. They're on a search party looking for this little boy who went missing. And I didn't know there was a little boy missing down there. And he says, do you think you could try to help us with that? And I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe. And so I said, I need to know his name, maybe a picture or something. And they said he was 10 years old, a little black boy. And they told me his name. And I just kind of tried to tune into that boy. And what I felt on the radio, and it was live, was I felt that Howie had been tied up and wrapped in a blanket and then duct taped like a mummy. And then I said, I felt this really cold, cold water, like the river. I said, it's like river water, but it has man-made edges, like the width of a bathtub, but it's still like river water. I'm like, that's what I'm feeling. And then I had to disconnect from it because I started to feel these emotions flood in that I would have lost control of that. And so I'm like, I gotta stop. And so the people that were on the search party that were listening, who had asked him if I could tune into that, they knew exactly what I was talking about when I said that. And apparently there were storm drains the width of a bathtub that connected to the river. And so they had river water in them. And they went and looked there and they found him right away. So things like that, I helped on a case of a girl that went missing from my reservation. And that was a hard one because the family wasn't ready to hear that she was dead.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's really ready, but it was really too soon for them. They weren't, everybody had so much hope still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know I knew who killed her. I knew that this guy was lying to throw off the police. And I said she died in the basement. And everybody, wanted to believe that that wasn't true. And it was sad because after I told them this, a couple days later, her phone turned on down in Minneapolis and sent her mom a text that she was just overwhelmed. Stop looking for me. I just need some time. And their phone turned back off again. And then everybody was all excited that she's alive.
Yeah.
Help us find her in Minneapolis. And I'm like, she's not in Minneapolis. She's dead. And they're like, no, she sent her mom a text. I said, that's not her. He's trying to throw everybody off. Oh, no, he's up there. And I said, he's got friends helping him. And sure enough, eventually everything was confessed that he killed her. She died in the basement. His two friends helped. His friend took the phone and sent the messages from the cities. You know, all that I said came out, but it was when I told the person who asked me to look at it, I said, they're not ready. They are not ready to hear this.
Yeah.
And it's not a fun thing to tell. Especially, it's
Man.
not a fun thing to tell anytime, but especially when they're not ready.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe get you on that Karen Horman case. That's one of the cases I follow, is the Karen Horman case. Are you familiar with that one? Missing kid in Oregon. He's been missing for 10, 12 years. They thought the stepmother had done it, but it's not gone anywhere. The case has not moved at all, probably in 3 years. I don't know what's going on there. Yeah.
I don't really like doing those things.
Yeah.
I really don't. It's more if I could help somebody, you know, that's different. If there was a possibility that they were still alive, that would be awesome.
Right. Yeah.
But the way that I know that there are psychics that gather information in a different way that I do.
Mm-hmm.
My way of doing that in particular is to go into like a oneness state with that particular person.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to like experience death with them. It's really unpleasant.
Oh, I bet.
And it really takes a lot out of me, because if I let myself go too far into it, I just lose control of my emotions and I feel all that trauma, and it's really hard to come back out of that. It's traumatic.
Yeah.
And I really don't like to do it. And so, you know, very rarely do I say, okay. Or if I'm working on, I've been at conventions where I'm working on somebody doing a holistic therapy treatment with them.
Mm-hmm.
And just randomly, I had a ghost approach me and like bump me and say, hey. And I was like, huh? And find out that it's this woman's daughter. And I didn't know this woman had a daughter who was missing. And I was like, what's going on? And then I felt the daughter, oh, it's okay, Mom, I'm right here. And I was like, oh, shit.
I got to pass this on to the mom, huh?
Yes. And so then I had to tell the mom, you know, I felt a spirit here. She's your daughter. And she's like, chill out, Mom. I'm right here. I'm still okay. I still exist, you know. And she's like, I felt her when you were working on me. She said, I felt her.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, I'm like, you know, that means that she's not living anymore. And she's like, yeah, I understand. You know, she was ready to accept that.
Yeah.
But for me, having to say that, you know, I just dread having to tell people that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I get that.
I can understand.
Oh, I see that person from Duluth is coming to the Para Unity conference.
Yep. So they're going to be there.
Oh, I hope you'll come and tell me who you are. I don't think your name is really 5040.
All right. Well, we are an hour and 38 minutes in, so I think this is a good stopping point.
Yes. I gotta
thank you so much for coming on, Jen.
Well, thanks, everybody. And remember to come to our YouTube channel and subscribe.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. And 5040, I love to hear what your real name is. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for having me on.
And really, really enjoyed the show, and you have some fascinating stuff to tell. And
it was a pleasure.
Well, thank you guys.
Really, yeah. Sorry we missed your partners. Maybe we'll do it again one day and get all three of you guys in there.
Yes,
absolutely.
They can tell their stories.
Yeah, we would love to hear them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. My name is Josh, and welcome to Hide and Seek Archives, a podcast where we talk about things supernatural, cryptid, or unexplained.